The Catholic swing vote will decide the next president of the United States. On this World Over Live election special, we will explore the Catholic vote and give you an issue-by-issue comparison of the candidates' positions. Washington editor of National Review Kate O'Byrne and Congressional Chief of Staff Michael Schwartz will analyze the campaigns and take your calls on this World Over Live election special straight ahead.
From our EWTN studios, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome to the World Over Live. On November 7th, one voting bloc will very likely determine the outcome of the presidential election. In recent years, no one has gone to the White House without them. They are 65 million strong, 30 million of them are registered, and they populate do-or-die battleground states this year. They are Catholic voters. The difficulty for the campaigns is figuring out who these voters are and what attracts their vote. During this special, we will explore the Catholic vote, check in with bishops from across the country for their moral guidance, bring you the latest polling data and full analysis of the race. Before we get started, I want to introduce our panel. She is the Washington editor of National Review and a regular on CNN's Capital Gang. We're very pleased to have Kate O'Byrne with us in the studio. Thank you for coming, Kate.
Thank you, Raymond.
And also from Washington, he is Chief of Staff for Oklahoma Representative Thomas Coburn and a registered Democrat, Michael Schwartz. Thank you for coming, Michael.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
If you want to be part of the conversation, give us a jingle at 1-800-221-9460. For those of you outside of the U.S., you can reach us at 01205-271-2980 or email us at worldover@EWTN.com. Now, as means of introducing the importance of the Catholic vote in this race, I want to show you the latest polling numbers. Here they are. This is the popular vote. Voter.com has Bush at 46%, Gore at 39%, and Buchanan at 1%. CNN Gallup has Bush at 47%, Gore at 43%, and Buchanan at 1%. MSNBC Zogby has Bush at 45%, Gore at 42%, and Buchanan at 1%. Can you all remember a time when the race was this tight?
Yeah, I was just looking at a Washington Post article the other day. The last polling done in 1980 had Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter tied. The Washington Post said, gee, this is going to go down to the wire. It's so tight. It's jockeyed back and forth. Ronald Reagan won a huge victory 2 days after that article was written.
But that was also a time, Michael, when they weren't spitting out polls every day, every hour.
You know, the polls that they're spitting out are not as good in quality. And I'll tell you the dirty little secret of the polling industry. They have a contact rate of less than 20%. For every voter they're able to reach and get a questionnaire from, they have to call at least 5, sometimes many more.
And that's a real
danger in the polling industry.
There are a lot of people who think if you poll over Friday and Saturday night, you're going to overpoll Democrats, you'll miss Republicans. There was a poll that took a nosedive in Pennsylvania this week, and a nervous candidate realized it was taken on Halloween, and families with children were out trick-or-treating between 7 and 9, and the polls, of course, picked up. A lot of people criticize the Zogby poll. He polls during the day, so you clearly get a different response.
Sample, yeah.
Exactly, if you're not calling at night.
Let's look at this Catholic vote. This is what the numbers are telling us. Fox has Bush with 44% of the Catholic vote, Gore with 45%. But the Voter.com poll has Bush with 43% and Gore at 38%. Buchanan is still at 1%. And the Zogby poll has Bush with 39% of Catholic voters, Gore with 48%, and Buchanan with 2%. Now, these things are they're all over the map.
Well, my guess would be that obviously reflects all Catholics.
Right.
I've seen numbers by the Battleground, the Voter.com poll, where they take out white Catholics.
White Catholics, right.
Because the Hispanic vote, unfortunately for Republicans, is so overwhelming Democrat. And the Battleground bipartisan poll has had George Bush up in double digits among white Catholics.
Michael, why are we seeing this disparity, though? None of them seem to be able to nail down
I don't think any of the polling organizations have been able to find Catholic voters in a representative sample. And one of the things that I've done in the past is look. This is not a representative sample either, but I've looked at majority Catholic counties that have a history of being neither Republican nor Democratic.
Right.
And historically, if you go back and look at those counties, you'll find that they are a very accurate barometer of the national electorate.
Interesting. Let's look at the electoral map. Now, according to the polling data, this is what it's telling us. The states in red appear to be solidly Bush. Now, the source on this is CNN. 270 electoral votes are needed to win the presidency. Currently, Governor Bush appears to have 209 electoral votes. Now, let's look at the Gore numbers. Vice President Gore is expected to win all the states in blue. They bring him to a total of 175 electoral votes. The remaining gray states are toss-ups, too close to call. They total 154 electoral votes. But look at the Catholic population of these toss-up or battleground states. Florida has 28% Catholic population. Maine, 35%. Minnesota, 30%. Michigan, 30%. New Hampshire is 42% Catholic. Pennsylvania, 32% Catholic. Michigan, 37% Catholic. These states are more, and more specifically, these Catholic swing voters will very likely determine the election. What are we seeing here?
Well, Catholics, first of all, do not vote as a bloc. And the Catholic population is extremely diverse. In fact, in recent elections, the Catholic vote has more closely tracked the national electorate than any other demographic group, including men or women. Okay? So, and that's because the Catholic population is so diverse that everything kind of balances out.
Right.
That means that what we have among the Catholic community is a hardcore base, maybe 30%, who are partisan Republicans, a hardcore base slightly larger, but not much larger, who are partisan Democrats, and the largest swing vote in American politics, strategically located in states with a lot of electoral votes. So if you tend to win the Catholic vote, you're going to take New York State, you're going to take Pennsylvania, you're going to take Ohio and Illinois and Michigan and Wisconsin, and if you do that, you're going to be president.
Just two things to add to what Mike said. The number of people who identify, the number of Catholics who identify themselves as Democrat is much larger than those who vote that way.
Yes. Right.
They're more apt to identify themselves in voter behavior. And of course, that's the Catholic vote broadly defined. When you look deeper at the Catholic vote and identify those most active Catholics, defined as those who go to Mass at least 4 times a month, they would be overwhelmingly Republican. In fact, they have a lot in common with something we're seeing in voting patterns over the last number of years. Religiously committed voters are now splitting. Now represent a bigger division between the parties than class distinction.
I would say, Kate, they're less likely to be overwhelmingly Republican than to vote overwhelmingly Republican, given the choices that we've been presented with in recent elections.
Of the active and inactive Catholics, which of those are the actual swing vote that we keep hearing so much about? Well, is the Catholic swing in one or
there's no point in going after inactive Catholics because you can't find them.
Because they tend to morph into the general electorate.
Yes, and in fact, the active Catholic voters, people who are participants in their parish life, who think of themselves as Catholics, they're people whose Catholicity will matter when it comes to voting. Somebody who was baptized and hasn't been in church in 20 years may vote for lots of reasons, but his faith isn't going to be one of the key reasons.
Who are these people, Kate? What are they looking for in a candidate?
Well, again, you have to make the distinction. You know what kind of Catholics are committed.
Let's start with the committed Catholics.
Yeah, I agree.
Probably easier to define.
You'll see when you actually do polling, as Crisis Magazine has done, the moral direction of the country is of utmost concern to them. Moral values. That's unsurprising. I do think, though, that among Catholics who are less active, certainly not among those who are not practicing at all, but less active, I think there are certain Catholic sensibilities that they respond to, too. And I think we find many of them.
What are those?
Well, if they've been educated in Catholic schools, maybe they've drifted away some, but I think they still maintain the same concern about moral values, strong sense of right and wrong, thinking as good as the economy is, there's something wrong with what's going on in the country. And a lot of polls tell us that the overall public, given a good economy, is concerned about those issues, and I think large numbers of Catholics are fueling those overall numbers.
Another side to that is Catholics used to be a fairly reliably Democratic constituency. Catholics then were liberal, but liberal in a certain way, and that certain way still stays with us. We tend psychologically to identify with the disadvantaged. Even though Catholics are wealthier than the average American, we still tend personally to identify with the disadvantaged because we know that's where we came from. We tend to have a very strong sense of fairness. When there are government policies, we want to make sure that that the burden is shared reasonably equally. We have a great sense of tolerance. We don't want to get into other people's business. After all, it was our ancestors who had to put up with prohibition, and we tend to respect other people's way of life. We want to have our way of life respected. Those are very core Catholic values.
And some of the changes we've seen in voter behavior on the part of Catholics, because as Mike said, they used to be a very important, reliable part of the Democratic base. There's been a migration towards the Republicans. Some of it is purely economics. Catholics have moved up, the immigrant Catholics, ethnic Catholics, have moved up the income ladder. They have different interests economically, but those Catholics, they've moved to the suburbs. Nobody in the family any longer belongs to a union. They still sympathize, though, I think, with the guy on the factory floor, despite the fact that that's no longer anybody in their own immediate family.
We only have a few seconds before we have to go to a break. I want to just share the National Journal as well as Hotline came out with this electoral map today. It has Bush at 248 electoral points, Gore at 269, with 21 points in flux. If Gore wins all of those, he still comes out at 269. Will we have a deadlock here?
What are you saying? Bush would still come up short.
Bush would still come up short, so would Gore. They'd be at 269, you need 270 to vote.
It's mathematically possible, but I think it's highly unlikely. I have the strong view that Bush is going to win this election by a convincing margin.
Let's pick that up in a few minutes when we return. We're going to take a quick break. When this World Over Live election special continues, we will compare the candidates' positions on the issues important to Catholic voters and take your calls. If you want to be part of the conversation, give us a ring, 1-800-221-9460. For those of you outside of the U.S., 01205-272980. Or email us at worldover@ewtn.com. On our way out, here is Cardinal Anthony Bevilacqua of Philadelphia with some guidance for Catholic voters. Take a look.
What a Catholic knows is that the Church is against abortion. The Church has made it clear over and over again. And that's a contradiction to say, I am a good Catholic, but I support abortion. That you cannot, differentiate, your Catholic life from your political life.
What can be done to help the thousands of Christians persecuted today in Sudan? How should the Church in America embrace immigrant Catholics who practice various customs and devotions? Will art and architecture in the churches of tomorrow look radically different from the churches of today? These are some of the issues that bishops from across America will address in the fall meeting of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. EWTN News takes you to Washington, D.C. beginning Sunday, November 12th, for a full week of coverage as the bishops make important decisions that could affect your parish. Exclusive coverage of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops begins Sunday, November 12th, only on EWTN.
If you would like to write to us at EWTN, we would love to hear from you. Our address is EWTN, 5817 Old Leeds Road, Irondale, Alabama, 35210.
Welcome back to the World Over Live, our election special. I'm Raymond Arroyo, joined on set by Cato Byrne and Michael Schwartz. I want to take us through the issues and get your analysis of these the positions and what they mean to Catholic voters. But first, let's go to Father Frank Pavone of Priests for Life. Here's what he considers the most important issue in the election. Father Frank, we have a Catholic population that is the swing vote according to all the major media outlets. 53% of Catholics in a recent poll claim they can be good Catholics and support abortion. Is that possible? Is that a legitimate claim?
Well, there is only one Catholic position on abortion, not 2 or 20. And to say that one supports abortion is to take a position that is completely contradictory to the Catholic Church. The Pope's encyclical, The Gospel of Life, could not have made it more clear. And further documents that we have had since then, including from our own bishops, make it absolutely clear that if you want to be a Catholic, if you want to claim to act as one, you must be radically opposed to abortion and any act of violence. That's the key to understanding it. We wouldn't say you're a good Catholic if if the Columbine high school shootings don't bother you. If you think that's okay, how can you be a good Christian? How can you be a decent human being? Same thing with abortion. And not only that it's wrong, but that laws that claim to legitimize it are not simply bad laws, that there are no laws at all.
Some of your critics would say, this is just one issue, and you're ignoring all these other important issues. Why focus on this one issue? We're not one-issue voters.
Well, you can have exclusionary issues. I mean, if you had Hitler running for office, it'd be one issue also. Right. The issue is, do you respect human beings? Someone put it to me this way. He was on a pro-life demonstration and came up to me and he said, Father, if a politician can't respect the life of a little baby, how's he going to respect mine? And that was a very insightful statement because, yeah, we're talking about one issue, but the issue happens to be the foundation of all the other issues.
You're imposing your morality on us.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what would you say to that?
Well, some people have said that we're calling for a Vatican takeover of America, and what I respond is, no, we're calling for an American takeover of America because we're calling America back to the principles of the very Declaration of Independence that began this nation, and that declaration's morality says that all people are created equal and that the right to life comes from the Creator and that the government must secure that right. So if we stand up and say the government has to protect all life, including the unborn, we're simply going back to the principles of America. We're not imposing anything.
Now, the Americans across the country will take to the polls on November 7th, many Catholics. What do the bishops say? How are the bishops saying Catholics should vote?
They use the image of a house, and they say that, all these other issues can be like the cross beams of the house, but the foundation is the fundamental right to life, which is now being attacked by abortion and euthanasia. You attack the foundation, the whole house collapses. Put in other words, what does a right to housing and health care mean if you don't have a right to be alive in the first place? The bishops have clearly outlined that our attitude toward attacks on innocent life has to be the number one concern.
Now, this seems to be consistent with the findings of our EWTN News poll. We asked viewers which issue was the most important to them in this election. More than 7,647 people said abortion. 474 said education. 478 said Social Security, and 301 said taxes. So overwhelmingly, certainly on our online poll, this seems to be the primary issue. Now, are the vast majority of practicing and non-practicing Catholics on board with this? Do you think they have identified abortion as the primary issue?
Not the vast majority. I think that the great majority of Catholics, certainly of active Catholics, are pro-life, and they want to do the right pro-life thing. But only a small minority, a relatively small minority, say, I wouldn't want to put a number on it, but a relatively small minority thinks through the issues so carefully and does enough research on candidates that they will say, okay, this is the most important thing. We're moved by a number of factors. We're all moved by a number of factors, and I think that almost all Catholics would take the right to life issue into consideration and weigh it as a very strong positive for a candidate. But it doesn't always. It's not always dispositive.
American public opinion is far more pro-life than you typically realize looking at just an overall number. Do you consider yourself pro-life or pro-choice? People call themselves pro-choice, but then I looked at a poll like this last week. When you look at what their position is on abortion, they wind up supporting or opposing about 97% of all abortions. They only support abortion if a mother's life is in danger, serious health consequences, and rape and incest, far closer to the Republican position. In fact, a poll I looked at last week that purported to show a majority of Catholics expressing support for abortion, when you looked at what instances they felt abortion was permissible, they wound up 2% of the population polled wound up agreeing with Al Gore, which is any time for any reason. Yet they call themselves pro-choice. So you have to be very careful.
Let's compare the candidates on the issues. We'll start with the abortion issue. It says right here, George Bush, he opposes Medicare-funded abortion, except in cases of rape, incest, and the life of the mother. He opposes federal funding of pro-abortion groups overseas. He opposes abortion on military bases. He also opposes partial birth abortion. And he opposes the use and sale of RU-486. Let's look at his opponent, Al Gore, the Democratic candidate. He supports federal funding of abortion with no exceptions. He supports federal funding of overseas abortion groups. He supports availability of abortion on overseas military bases. He supports partial birth abortion at the doctor's discretion, which is something I want to discuss when we get out of the segment. He supports use and sale of RU-486. Let's look at Pat Buchanan's position. He opposes federal funding of abortion, opposes federal funding of overseas abortion groups, opposes availability of abortion on overseas military bases, and opposes the use and sale of RU-486. Now, the first thing I want to get into, in your opinion, looking at that, who do you consider the most viable pro-life candidate?
Well, clearly, Bush is. These are important issues you picked out, too, because they're not theoretical issues. These are issues that we've actually voted on in Congress. We've seen vetoes on them, or we've seen a failure to pass them because the White House bullies us in negotiations, or because the Senate uses the White House as an excuse not to pass them. These are real, attainable objectives if we had a president who was willing to sign pro-life legislation. Would they? Do they go all the way? No, that's not as far as we need to go. But it moves us in the right direction. It helps to create a stronger climate of opinion for the pro-life position. And more important than that, in the long run, it makes it easier for politicians whose primary interest is just their own career. It makes it easier for them to say, yes, I'm pro-life, and I voted for the partial birth abortion ban, or I voted to take RU-486 off the market. And when politicians feel that it's easy to be on the pro-life side, we're going to start winning, because you win in the long run when all the opportunists come your way.
Kate? We'll probably see again this year what we see every 4 years. Roughly 6% of people voting will tell pollsters they voted based on the abortion issue. And those people for whom it's the primary issue split 2-to-1 in favor of the pro-life candidate. I was out at the Democratic Convention in Los Angeles. Raymond, it was a celebration for 4 days of abortion. There was not a night that speakers, virtually no speaker took the microphone, including Carolyn Kennedy, without talking about abortion. How critically important it was that the Democrats win, because Republicans pose a threat to abortion on demand through 9 months. And I was also struck, Senator Joe Lieberman is an independent thinker within Democratic ranks. That has been his reputation in the Senate. He was forgiven disagreeing with the top of the ticket on affirmative action, on privatizing Social Security, on school choice. The one thing he would not have been forgiven, I am sorry to report, had he ever supported any kind of a pro-life measure. I really do not believe the party would have permitted him on that ticket.
I want to get into something. There was a recent CNN story, Catholic News Service story, that had an interview with the Vice President, and he said he hopes for common ground on abortion at the grassroots level. He also, in a questionnaire, a campaign questionnaire, said he supports a partial birth abortion ban where there's a health exception for the mother's life. Now, what does that effectively do to the ban?
You've been involved in those battles, Michael.
President Clinton, this is President Clinton's position. He justifies his veto of the partial birth abortion ban, says we need a health exception. Well, health exception was defined by the Supreme Court. Most reporters don't realize this. Certainly the public doesn't realize it. The Supreme Court in 1973 said health includes anything. In other words, if you feel discomfort at the prospect of having a live baby instead of a dead baby, then your health is in jeopardy and you need to have that baby killed.
What about the question Tim Russert asked Vice President Gore?
That's about capital punishment, the one I remember. Tim Russert asked Vice President Gore. Vice President Gore, of course, strongly favors executing criminals who have committed capital offenses. Well, Russert said, well, what about if a pregnant mother has committed a crime and she's due to be executed? Would you execute her? And Gore said, well, why not? He hadn't thought about it. And Russert pressed him. He said, well, you know, we've got a federal law against that. And Gore said, well, I guess it would be the mother's choice. Whether she wanted to be executed now, killing her innocent unborn child, or later. Now, here's a guy who won't even stop at executing a pregnant mother.
Kate? Anything else to say on this?
The orthodoxy of the abortion rights activists, I'm afraid, within the base of the Democratic Party is such that they just cannot admit to the humanity of the unborn child in any circumstances. There is no common ground. I naively thought that perhaps a ban on partial birth abortion was that common ground people have been looking for so long. What Senator Moynihan called infanticide. But for the Clinton and Gore administration, that has not even been it.
One of the last things on this point, one of the last things we did in Congress this year is we passed a law in the House that said you can't kill a baby who's born alive. All right, 15 members of the House voted against that. We couldn't bring it up in the Senate because Senator Conrad said certain members of my party and his disagreed with it. The president didn't want to be embarrassed with that. The abortion lobby doesn't want a law saying you can't kill a baby who's already born.
Regarding this quote by the Vice President in Catholic News Service and the voter survey which the Catholic bishops commissioned, and Al Gore said he supported the partial birth abortion ban. Cardinal Francis George of Chicago released a statement recently, and it was just handed to me. It says, Mr. Gore is captive to Catholics for a Free Choice and other groups which are intolerant of the teachings of the Catholic Church and oppose it at every opportunity. Given the internal politics of his own party, Mr. Gore's position is understandable. What is not understandable is deception about his position under words which mask what he holds. I can't imagine any informed Catholic being deceived, but it's insulting to be played out in this manner. What is worse, the deception is sometimes propagated by Catholic media, which make themselves shills for positions they are told they cannot criticize because of the separation of church and state. I will leave that as the final word on that debate. Let's look at the fetal tissue research stance of each candidate. According to the data we have now, George Bush opposes federally funded embryonic stem cell research. Al Gore, his opponent, supports federally funded embryonic stem cell research, and Pat Buchanan opposes federally funded stem cell research. What is the story here? This is obviously going to be an issue for the future and the present. Does this hurt Gore?
I don't think it hurts him, even among Catholics, because most people don't understand what this issue is all about. It's sort of high-tech science, but what it really is all about is, are we going to take small human beings early in their life? Are we going to have them have their lives begin for the specific purpose of experimenting with them, killing them in those experiments, and trying to develop either new things to play with scientifically in theory or therapies? And ironically, what we're finding in the medical community is that the therapeutic use of stem cells is best done not from embryos, not from young human beings, but rather from the patient himself. We all generate lots and lots of stem cells.
Congress tried to stop this. I mean, Congress had a prohibition on this, and recently the administration opened the floodgates to this sort of...
Well, yes and no. Actually, this issue will be determined absolutely by this election, because the next president will be in a position to make the first grant, which I would hold, and a large number of members of the household would be an illegal grant, but we have no way to stop it until it happens. If the vice president is elected, I expect he will make those grants to begin doing this destructive research of human embryos. If Mr. Bush is elected, I expect he will not.
Let's go to an issue I know near and dear to Kate's heart, school choice. George Bush, the Republican, supports vouchers for children in failing schools. He would double the number of charter schools. Al Gore opposes vouchers. He supports charter schools and public school choice. And Pat Buchanan supports vouchers for all schools, public and private. What of the voucher issue, Kate? Isn't this a dead duck? I mean, the polling on this is not good. Support for vouchers.
We have a test coming up on Tuesday in Michigan. An initiative's on the ballot. I would have thought that initiative was drawn in the most attractive way for school choice. It was means tested for the most disadvantaged children in schools that were failing so miserably you couldn't argue that the children shouldn't be allowed to leave. There was a hold harmless where no monies were going to be taken from any other public school. They seem to have built into that initiative provisions that met all of the objections. And it looks as though in the polls that initiative is going down. It is so easy to mount a scare campaign, a misleading scare campaign on these provisions. And secondly, the teachers' unions, very well funded, are so opposed to school choice, even for the worst schools that are trapping the neediest children.
And the bishops are very supportive of the vouchers.
And they have been in Michigan. They've been a very important ally for those trying to do something on behalf of these children trapped in these schools. But it looks as though this latest effort won't be succeeding on Tuesday.
Michael?
Well, the teachers' unions are extremely powerful in setting local policy, but I don't see much hope in either the Michigan or the California referenda that are coming up. However, I do see hope in the actual experiments that are happening now in the state of Florida, in Cleveland, in Milwaukee. They're proving that when parents can choose schools for their children, those children succeed. And thanks to Justice Scalia, whose intellectual power on this issue has thrown away a lot of the trash thinking of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court no longer is objecting to this sort of thing.
Just very briefly, because we've got to get on to the other issues, don't you think, though, that there is a danger here by allowing those government funds to come into the parochial school system. Won't that money come with strings attached?
As long as the money goes to the parents, and that's the only way that's constitutionally permissible, then the schools will be accountable to parents. And schools should be accountable to parents.
This Congress, to its credit, has tried to push through such a plan on behalf of low-income kids in Washington, D.C. The schools that Congress has responsibility for, they've been unable to. Should they be successful, President Bush would sign such a bill and at least rescue some of those children trapped in these schools.
Let's go to school funding. Here are the candidates' plans. Governor Bush would increase the limit on annual tax-free education accounts from $500 to $5,000. He'd increase Pell Grants from $3,300 to $5,100, and he hopes to help states establish merit-based scholarship programs. Here's Al Gore's plan for school funding: tax-free education accounts for all, $2,500 per year, and tax-free withdrawals if used for education, up to $10,000 yearly tax deduction for families who have college fees and expenses. And Pat Buchanan, he would return school funding to state and local control, and he supports tax-free education accounts. Cut to the chase here for me, gang. What does this mean to the Catholic voter? The Catholic voter looking at this is probably a bit bewildered.
Parents with children. I think all of those positions reflect the relatively limited role the federal government has for K through 12. So what can the federal government do? They can try to make college education more affordable by with IRS regulations that treat saving for education favorably, which is what most of the candidates have there. Unfortunately, Al Gore's college plan, there's already a 20% such tax deduction. He only brings it up to 28%. It's not very good news for Catholic families. It's only good for one child at a time. Many Catholic families have more than one child at a time in college. And you can't use it if you have any loans. An awful lot of people have loans for college. So it winds up being a much narrower new benefit.
Those are criticizing the details, though. I think that the moral question here is, are these candidates trying to meet a serious issue? I think they both are. They're both trying to use the tax system to make college more accessible to more people. And you can pick at the details and see which one's better. But Bush and Gore really don't have a sharp difference here. Buchanan does. Buchanan says this isn't a function of the federal government, which is sort of a strict constructionist view.
Throw it back to the states.
Exactly.
Let's look at the child care tax credit that will be offered by these candidates. Governor Bush supports the doubling of the child care tax credit to $1,000. It's currently $500. Al Gore would make a new refundable tax credit to cover up to 50% of child care costs. And Pat Buchanan would double the child care tax credit to $1,000. What's the story here? Buchanan
and Bush are obviously identical here, and that's the right position. In fact, back in 1988, when Governor Bush's father was running for president, he said $1,000 child tax credit. I had a lot to do with that. I'm proud of it because this idea came right out of the Vatican. It is the idea of child allowances.
And it's not tied to child care.
It is not.
If you have a child, you get that tax credit.
This is what's wrong with Vice President Gore's proposal. He will not help families raise their children. He will only help families farm their children out. No.
He does give a tax credit to
only
people
if you spend money to have somebody else take care of your child.
But for the stay-at-home mom?
Well, both for the stay-at-home mom and even for somebody who might be working part-time and has a relative caring for the child. If it's not professional, organized daycare, group daycare, the credit doesn't apply. Most families, polls tell us, prefer family arrangements, relatives, team tagging as a couple. So a credit that goes to every child
the whole idea
gives families much more flexibility.
The idea is choice. Choice is it.
Let's go to the next issue. This is the marriage penalty, something we've heard a lot about in recent days on the Hill. Here are the candidates' positions. Governor Bush would reduce the marriage penalty for couples who itemize. Al Gore would reduce marriage penalty for low-income couples who are ineligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit. And Pat Buchanan would repeal the marriage penalty. Okay, gang. This was recently vetoed by the president when the Congress attempted to roll this back. Any chances that this will happen?
Oh, yeah. There is a strong bipartisan majority, not quite enough to override a veto, but a strong bipartisan majority to enact the reduction in the marriage penalty that Governor Bush is talking about, if the next president would be willing to sign that. We don't yet have a consensus for the right position, which I think is repeal the marriage penalty altogether. I like Pat's position on that. The problem with the vice president's position is that It is essentially a disguised way of rewarding failure.
And Kate, doesn't Governor Bush's plan as well? It's sort of just nibbling at the edges. You can only get it if you itemize.
Well, except most families do itemize.
Okay.
And the problem, the opposite problem, of course, what the Al Gore proposal is. You can't get it if you itemize. So you make any charitable deductions, you can't get it. If you own a home, you can't get it. It clearly should be eliminated. Pat Buchanan has the strongest position on this one.
Okay.
But even the Bush plan would save married couples on average $1,400 a year that they pay by virtue of the fact that they're married.
Okay. Let's look at Social Security, another major issue, and as we saw in our poll, some people very interested in this one. Here's Governor Bush's position. He would have no interruptions in benefits for current retirees. He would channel $2 trillion worth of surplus back into the Social Security fund. He also would allow individuals to invest part of their payroll taxes in the market. Al Gore would strengthen Social Security and Medicare with over $2.5 trillion set aside from 2001 to 2010. And Pat Buchanan supports a pay-as-you-go plan that would allow for personal retirement accounts. A lot of scared seniors out there. Who is the better plan? Who has the better plan, in your opinion, and why?
I think the most important thing is no seniors should ever be scared. There is no one in the entire political landscape in the United States,
Republican, Democrat, or otherwise,
or anything else, who is not committed to guaranteeing and keeping every promise that has been made. And those promises will be kept and they can be kept. The real issue is what's good for the long-term survival of retirement security. I don't think Pat has a plan. I think that the Vice President's plan is keep the current system, and when we come to a crash, then we'll figure out what to do. The clear, obvious thing we have to do is what other countries have done, which is move from a system which presumes a growing population, and therefore can afford to defer payments to the next generation, have the next generation pay for our retirement, and replace it with a vested system so that we own our own pensions. And Bush's plan moves in that direction. It isn't there yet. It's not all the way, but it's in that direction.
Because we should tell people the current system is going to go bust. The Congressional Budget Office, everybody has projected by 2013.
We know when it's going to happen. We know, and if we don't start fixing it now, every day we defer it. Every day we defer it makes it harder to fix.
It can't sustain the baby boomers. It just can't. I mean, it can meet all current obligations, but it cannot sustain the huge baby boomer cohort coming along to retire. This is a wonderful moment. Just when the system faces this kind of crisis, there's a $4 trillion projected surplus in Washington. So now is the time to make those kind of systemic changes, modest systemic changes to Social Security. Let the private marketplace with some small portion of payroll taxes do some of the heavy lifting in order to increase future benefits.
Okay, very good. Let's look at gay marriage. This is another issue that has been very prominent. We heard about it in the debates. Here is what the candidates are saying. Governor Bush opposes legalization of homosexual marriages and domestic partnerships. Al Gore opposes legalization of homosexual marriages, but supports legalization of domestic partnerships or civil unions. And Pat Buchanan opposes legalization of homosexual marriages and domestic partners outright. How decisive is this election in deciding this issue, in your opinion?
I think quite important. Quite important. In addition to what we see now happen in Vermont, where they actually have sanctioned civil unions, it's an issue that will be before the Supreme Court. We had a related issue with the Boy Scout case with respect to so-called gay rights. There is legislation pending on Capitol Hill, and I think a fairly aggressive lobby that would like to do something along these lines. The Republican Congress did pass the Defense of Marriage Act. They were watching, in that case, Hawaii. It looked as though Hawaii might be the first state to legalize homosexual marriages. They wanted to make sure that other states wouldn't have to recognize, would be free to refuse to recognize such a union. It is clearly an issue percolating up through the states, and I think there's every chance that in the next 4 to 6 years it'll confront Washington, D.C. and the new president.
There's a lot of there's a lot of gay money sloshing around, I know, in this campaign season. Will this be a primary issue?
It's a primary issue for a small but very intense constituency, and one, unfortunately, that has a stranglehold on the National Democratic Party. But the real issue that I think matters here is the Supreme Court. You know, by 4 members of the Supreme Court, 4 of those people think that the gay rights ideology is so important that it should outweigh freedom of association, which is right in the First Amendment. What other First Amendment rights will those four people think that gay rights ideology outweighs? I don't want them joined by a fifth.
And Michael, Justice Stevens, in that was one of those four in the Boy Scout case, he actually said that the Boy Scouts' insistence on representing traditional morality showed a religious bigotry. Now, if traditional morality can be defined by a Supreme Court justice as an expression of religious bigotry, it's a critical reminder of how important the Supreme Court is, and an awful lot of court watchers anticipate the next president could appoint up to 3 Supreme Court justices.
And we'll talk about that in the next segment. I want to go to our final issue here. This is gays in the military, which was a big topic during the last campaign, and we saw it, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell of President Clinton. Let's take a look at these policy positions. George Bush supports Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Al Gore supports homosexuals openly serving in the military. And Pat Buchanan supports a ban on homosexuals in the military. What is the impact of homosexuals in the military? What about the Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
You mean as an election issue?
Let's talk about this as an election issue and outside of that. What has been the impact on the military?
Unfortunately, I don't think it is that potent an election issue because most of us, both inside and outside the armed forces, have accommodated to the Clinton-esque violation of the law. Don't Ask, Don't Tell, remember, is an agreement. Let's wink and not enforce the law. It is a policy that should be repealed. We need to go back to respecting law in all its domains. I mean, this is part of the corrosion of legality that has happened during the 8 years of President Clinton's tenure.
Kate, where does that leave this election? That said, this stance on the campaign issue. Bush supports the Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Yeah, I'm closer to Pat Buchanan on this one. George Bush supports this status quo. You'll remember during one of the debates, Al Gore went so far as to say he'd demand his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, before he would appoint anyone, would have to support his position on permitting homosexuals openly serving. Michael makes an excellent point. When President Clinton first proposed this in 1993, the public was shocked. It's like boiling a frog slowly, though. I mean, there's been 7 years now. I think it's been terrible for morale in the military. There have been all sorts of problems with the proposal. But unfortunately, an awful lot of people don't appreciate that. And this is what can sometimes happen. It, I think, is probably more broadly accepted in the year 2000 than it certainly was in 93 when the public was first confronted with it.
But it's still deleterious to military readiness.
Absolutely.
It is a real problem in the armed forces.
In a moment, we will take your calls. Our lines are open. Call us at 1-800-221-9460. Outside of the U.S., you can reach us at 01205-271-2980 or email us at worldover@EWTN.com. As we go to break, we leave you with some analysis from Cardinal Law of Boston on the election. The World Over Live continues in a moment.
This is the edge of Europe, as far west as you can go. Beyond us is 3,000 miles of the grey Atlantic. For the early Christian monks who settled here almost 1,500 years ago, Skellig Michael, off the southwest coast of Ireland, was the farthest shore, and they aspired to its isolation. This is a story about searching for God on the margins.
The Edge of Europe, only on the Global Catholic Network, EWTN.
Discover the exquisite monastery of Santa Maria de Poblet, one of the 3 adjacent monasteries that comprise Catalonia's Cistercian Trinity. The silence of Poblet is the work of God. The architecture of this temple transports the spirit to contemplate the master designer, God himself. The Monastery of Poblet, only on the Global Catholic Network, EWTN.
Take a look at what's online now at www.ewtn.com.
At EWTN's homepage, click on Vote 2000. You'll find a guide for making moral choices at the voting booth in the upcoming election. It's all waiting for you at EWTN.com. Visit today.
EWTN is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If your cable or satellite provider doesn't carry EWTN's full programming lineup, give them a call and let them know you would like to receive EWTN 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Welcome to the World Over Q&A segment. For those of you just joining us, we're talking about the presidential election and the Catholic vote with Kate O'Byrne, Washington editor of National Review, and Michael Schwartz, a Capitol Hill chief of staff. Let's go right to your questions. Here is an email from Ohio, from Jeff Resser. Dear Raymond and guests, why doesn't the partial birth abortion question make a greater impact on Catholics? Why isn't this resonating?
Well, I think it does make a great impact on Catholics. I'll tell you, I know a lot of people who voted consistently for Democratic candidates who are pro-abortion, even some who voted for, well, a few who voted for Republican Catholics who are pro-abortion, and who said, never again, I'm not going to vote for Barbara Mikulski again, or Connie Morella, or whoever it might have been.
Mm-hmm. I think the cardinals on partial birth abortion, the ban on partial birth abortion, as you might remember, mounted an unprecedented effort, coming to Washington, marching at the White House, holding a session on the plaza of the Capitol. Candidates have to talk about the issue. It seems hard to believe, but an awful lot of people aren't fully informed with respect to both that issue and exactly where the candidates stand. And I fault an awful lot of candidates who walk the walk but won't talk the talk. And I think more candidates ought to be raising the abortion issue. Too often they're intimidated by the liberal media.
Yeah, and petrified that this somehow is a loser, and in fact it's
despite
a loss
all the evidence
or a winner.
showing that it's certainly not.
Far from it.
80% of the public, broadly, not Catholics, support a ban on partial birth abortion, and as I said, candidates could profit by talking about it.
Yeah, the partial birth abortion issue has ignited ordinary rank-and-file Catholics in a way that other aspects of the life issue have not.
We're seeing a shift overall in people who call themselves pro-life ever since the debate over partial birth abortion, because for one of the first times since Roe v. Wade, the focus is not on funding, the focus is not on parental consent, the focus is on the living baby. And I think don't you think it's really educated and informed an awful lot of people about the abortion issue? And I attribute the debate over this to shifting public opinion in a more pro-life direction.
Quick question, looking at the Buchanan numbers and the Buchanan issue here, he's 1% in all the polls. Is he a factor, and what are his prospects?
I think he's not a factor. The major media are not covering Pat. He has become, unfortunately for him, at the end of his career, he's become kind of a laughingstock, and it's too bad. But the reason for it is there's no reason for a Pat Buchanan candidacy this year, because Governor Bush, while he's certainly far from perfect in a lot of ways, and I expect to be disappointed by him on numerous occasions should he be president, he has not done anything that would justify saying, I can't vote for this guy. That's really the issue.
Kate, very quickly.
Pat has been such an articulate champion of the unborn and so many good social conservative causes. His base in the Republican Party is a pro-life base. Recently, he has been more interested in global economic issues, trade issues. That is not his base in the Republican Party, and I think his typical pro-life supporters recognize that this time round, the stakes are such that they just can't support Pat if their support for Pat could risk electing Al Gore.
Let's go to a call. This is Charles from New York. Go ahead, Charles. You're on the World Over Live.
Hi, good evening to you all.
Evening.
I want to take you back to these polls, which I'm frankly not a big fan of, other than the battleground polls.
Okay.
As you, Mr. Byrne, said, 80% of the people favor a ban on partial birth abortion. I can't see, and I frankly believe that your colleagues from the media have done a real good smoke job on us over the years regarding these things.
What's your question, Charles?
Don't you think that there is a lot more support for, in effect, Christian and Jewish principles involved than they're shown in these polls?
Very good. Do you think there is a quiet, silent majority there that we haven't heard from, that these polls are not reflecting?
On some, but not all of the issues. I think that there is a very strong consensus against partial birth abortion. I think there's a much weaker consensus against abortion in other circumstances. I don't think there's a consensus at all on a lot of other issues. For example, gay rights. I think most people have been bowled over by the immense propaganda wave that all we're talking about is tolerance, when in fact what we're talking about is the establishment of parity and ultimately the definition of normality of a condition which is essentially the embrace of sin.
Kate, do you expect to see a massive upset from these poll numbers?
I expect George Bush to win. I think he's roughly 5% ahead, and I think on Tuesday that might wind up being what the popular vote is. One of the media's favorite quadrennial stories is how the Republican Party is fighting amongst themselves, the Republican Party over abortion. When you look at the vote to ban partial birth abortion, 6 Republicans refused to support the ban in the House. 73 Democrats voted for the ban. Not only voted for the ban, voted to override their own president's veto of the ban. There is a real division on current pro-life issues on the Democratic side.
Right. So these
as a Democrat, let me talk about that, because that division is at the base. The closer you get to the grassroots, the more pro-life Democrats there are. I work in the House of Representatives, and I can tell you there are a lot more pro-life Democrats in the House, and I mean really pro-life, than there are pro-abortion Republicans. And we prove it vote after vote after vote. And they get elected, those members get elected by Democrats who are pro-life, union members, people who are not members of the religious right or anything else, but who respect and honor the first principle of morality.
Let's go to a call. Mary from Kansas. You're on the World Over Live. What's your question, Mary?
Hi.
Hi.
I am wanting to know what your guests think about the latest revelations about Bush's non-disclosure of
the drinking under the influence charge,
and also the recent Dallas Morning News article.
What's in the Dallas Morning News?
What is that reference?
Excuse me?
What was in the Dallas Morning News article, Mary?
Apparently, they said that he lied about this.
The DUI charge. Okay.
Right.
All right. There we are. How much impact does this have? This drinking under the influence? 8 years ago?
24 years ago. 24 years ago. I think for that very reason it has practically no impact. In fact, it might be a positive. After all, Governor Bush told us last year, he told the nation, when he was young, he had a drinking problem. He did things he's not proud of, but he hasn't touched a drop since 1986. I certainly can't say that. And, but I think
I'm not a priest. You need not confess.
I think what we're seeing is what he told us. Right. Yes, indeed. He committed an offense. He paid his fine. And he turned his life around.
Do you think that's the way he answered it?
When he talks about the fact that he had a drinking problem and quit drinking when he turned 40, he has not had a drink in 14 years. When he talked in broad terms prior to that, he did things he wasn't proud of and he made mistakes. I think that is perfectly frank enough. I see no need for him to go beyond that. Yesterday, though, when the story did break, suspiciously 4 days before the election, but that's the nasty business he's now involved in, I thought he handled it with humility and dignity. So I can't imagine it's going to be held against him. In fact, I appreciate one reason he might not have told us is he's capable of being embarrassed and ashamed, and I think that's a little refreshing after the past 7 years.
I will not comment. We want to go now to Bishop Curtis, who is on the line. We're very pleased to be joined by His Excellency Archbishop Eldon Curtis of Omaha, Nebraska. Your Excellency, is there lingering... It seems to be a lingering confusion among Catholic voters. We see it in the letters and the email. The bishops are saying vote pro-life, but the major pro-life candidate supports the death penalty. Is that a deal breaker for Catholic voters?
Well, I think there's a priority of issues. Catholic teaching does not weigh opposition to capital punishment the same way, for instance, it weighs opposition to abortion. And so, I think the thousands of innocent preborn babies killed every year by abortion constitutes a greater evil than execution of felons. I mean, I'm against the death penalty, but I weigh these differently. I think the church expects us to weigh these things differently, not only just because of the sheer number of deaths, but because of the gravity of the act. I mean, capital punishment is not intrinsically evil, but abortion is. And so I think opposition to abortion has to be a priority of Catholics who support the Church's teaching about the sacredness of human life, and it seems to me that ought to be a priority then.
So you wouldn't say that all issues should be taken in common. We have to have a priority.
Well, yeah, we weigh these issues differently. I think we have to be consistently pro-life, but as I just said, abortion is a much greater evil than capital punishment.
Very good. Archbishop Eldon Curtis, I thank you so much for joining us and for taking so much time out of your busy schedule.
My pleasure.
And we really should say, for clarity's sake, all of the major candidates, Bush, Gore, Buchanan, support the death penalty. Only Nader is an opponent of the death penalty.
And only Gore is in favor of executing pregnant mothers and killing their unborn children. And that needs to be underscored. I was outraged when he said that.
Mm-hmm. Will this be a factor? Do you think the death penalty will be a factor here? Many Catholics still unsure. I think the bishop answered many of those concerns. But will the issue be a factor?
I don't see it a factor this election year.
Mm-hmm.
I do see, though, some evidence of a change in public opinion on the capital punishment issue. In fact, public opinion polls reflect that.
Right.
Support for it is slipping. Partially, I think, because of questions raised about the criminal justice system and how airtight it can be and how certain we can ever be. Partially, I think, because of questions the Holy Father's raised.
I'm going to have to leave it there. That's all the time we have. Cato Byrne, Michael Schwartz, I thank you both for joining me and for coming all this way. In closing, we hope the program gave you a clearer idea of where the candidates stand on the issues and helped clarify what the leadership of the Catholic Church requires of the Catholic voter. Our intention was not to tell you how to vote, but to provide you with the information to cast an informed vote. We will be back again next Friday night. And remember, in the meantime, you can go to our website, www.ewtn.com, for voter information and some moral guidance. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen on behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News. I'm Raymond Arroyo, reminding you to get to the ballot box on Tuesday. Bye now.